Adding unlike denominators is built off of a 4th grade skill. In 4th grade, students are required to add like denominators, or denominators that have the same amount. What I mean by that is they were maybe given an example of 1/4, and they're asked to add 2/4 to that amount. So when we're looking at this visually, and we're drawing a model to represent what we're doing with numbers, I'm going to draw my whole, and the denominator represents the whole that's divided into that many parts. So the whole is divided into 4 parts equally. And this first fraction represents 1/4. So I'm going to go ahead and shade in 1/4. And from there, we're asked to add 2 more fourths. Because this is divided into fourths, I can just add my numerator, 2, and shade in 1/4, and there's another 1/4. So when I begin to add up my fourths, in order to find the sum, I can easily recognize that my answer is 3/4. In 5th grade, we build upon that idea or concept. The way we do that is we start off with maybe a fraction that has unlike denominators. So 1/3 plus 2/5. Now, I could go ahead and add 1 plus 2 and 3 plus 5 and think that I'm on the right track. But logically, let's take a deeper look into what this means. Remember that the denominator represents the whole divided into that many parts. So if I draw one whole and divide it into thirds, and I also draw another model to represent my fifths, I'm easily able to recognize that a third is actually greater than a fifth, and they're not the same. They're not like denominators. So with this being said, I need to actually look at my denominators and rename them so that they're the same. How do we do that? Well, there's a strategy called least common multiple, LCM for short. So with this least common multiple, as a mathematician, I can take these denominators and I can go through my math facts, my multiples, until I find a number that they both share or have in common. And I don't have to get very far to automatically recognize that they both have a 15 of a multiple that they share, that's in common. So with this being said, once you find the LCM or least common multiple, we're going to rename these fractions so that I can find a more accurate answer. So now that we've renamed our fractions, we need to rename our numerators. What do we do? How do we do this? Those are kind of questions that come to my mind. And this is a place that most students get stuck. We'll go back to where you started from. I often ask myself, well, if I started at 3 and rename my fraction to where the denominator becomes a 15, what happened? Well, mathematically, I multiplied by 5. 3 times 5 is 15. As a teacher, we often remind the students of a quick tip. Whatever you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top. What this means is that if you rename the denominator, you also have to rename the numerator because they are a part of one number. So if you multiply the denominator by 5, you need to multiply the numerator by 5. And 1 times 5 is 5. Now, if you didn't catch that, that's okay, because we're about to rename the second fraction. Again, I went from a 5 to a 15. How did that happen? Well, I know 5 times 3 is 15. And whatever I do to the denominator, I need to also mathematically do to the numerator. So if 5 times 3 is 15, 2 times 3 is 6. Now that I've renamed my numerators, I can add them together to find a more accurate number because my parts are the same. 5 plus 6 is 11. And my denominator does not change because I'm working with the same part. Now, we tried adding. Let's go to subtracting. So again, I'm going to write down a fraction. And we're going to actually subtract 1/4 from 2/7. Do you remember what to do? Hopefully, you're already noticing that the denominators are different or unlike. We cannot simply just subtract and continue on. We've got to make sure that they have a common denominator. So as the strategy goes, I'm going to place my denominators off to the side and find the least common multiple. 7, 14, 21, 28. 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, 28. And as I'm going, I don't have to go past the number that I already recognize as the LCM. So once I have the LCM, or least common multiple, that becomes my new denominator. And we're renaming the fraction with the new denominator. Hopefully in your mind, you're already asking yourself that step that is so important. If I renamed my denominator, how am I renaming my numerator? So 7 times 4 is 28. And because 2/7 is an entire fraction, that numerator also needs to be multiplied by 4. So 2 times 4 is 8. On the second fraction, I went from 4 to a 28. Well, mathematically, 4 times 7 is 28. And whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top because it's an entire fraction. So 1 times 7 is 7. So from here, all you have to do is subtract. 8/28 minus 7/28 is 1/28. And with this being said, you can kind of draw a visual after you rename them of 8/28. And shade in 8 on the first fraction. Because this represents the total that you have. And because you're subtracting, it means that you're taking away from that total. So I just simply draw an X to show that I'm removing that amount from my total. And after removing 7/28 from my total, I recognize that there is 1/28 left.